Chapter 13. Ye tyrants quake, your day is over. March 1917. Anxious days at the palace. While Nicholas slept and Petrograd burned, Alexandra fretted about her children. Olga, Tatiana, and Alexei had all been sick with measles for the last 2 days. They lay in their darkened bedrooms, their fever soaring, and their bodies covered in red splotches. Things were so serious, Dr. Botkin had left his house in town and moved into the palace to be near them. Alexandra had barely rested since the first red flush spread across Olga's face. Donning her nurse's uniform and ignoring her own ailments, she had cared for her children around the clock. She knew little about the events erupting outside the palace, not until the evening of Monday, March 12th. That's when Anna Virubova's father limped into the lilac drawing room. Petrograd is in the hands of the mob, he panted. They are stopping the cars. They commandeered mine, and I've had to walk every step of the way. Hours later, the palace phone rang. It was Radzienko. The empress and her children were in danger, he warned, and should leave Tsarskoye Selo immediately. There was no telling what the angry mob might do, and with so many soldiers in revolt, he had no way of protecting her. Alexandra refused. The children were too ill. Besides, she had just received word from her husband. He was on his way home. When a house is burning, argued Radzienko, the invalids are the first to be taken out. But the empress was firm. She would wait. Little did she know that the rebels had already seized the railroads around Tsarskoye Selo. All escape routes were gone. Tuesday, March 13th, dawned with a thick snowfall and an icy wind that rattled the palace windows. Upstairs in their sick beds, the half-conscious children burned with fever. They were getting worse. And so were events outside the palace gates. Hours earlier, a mob of rebellious soldiers from Petrograd had arrived in the town of Tsarskoye Selo. They had come, they shouted, for that German woman and her son. But before storming the palace, they sacked the town. Drunken soldiers were running back and forth, carrying off all they could lay hands on in the shops, recalled Dr. Botkin's daughter, Tatiana. Some carried bales of dry goods, others boots. Still others, though already quite drunk, were making off with bottles of wine and vodka. Even with the howling wind, Alexandra could hear the soldiers whooping and shouting. She could hear the sounds of breaking glass and gunshots. What would happen if the mob reached the palace? "We shall not, must not be afraid," she said to her friend Lily Dane, who was visiting the family. "Everything is in the hands of God. Tomorrow the emperor will come. I know that when he does, all will be well." Besides, they weren't entirely helpless. That morning, 1,500 men, a battalion of the still loyal Guard Equipage, the Marine Guard that had protected them on the standard, had arrived to defend the palace. Most of the Cossack guards and the other soldiers who had protected the imperial park had deserted to join the revolution. Looking out at the battalion, 15-year-old Anastasia felt reassured. "It's just like being on the yacht again," she declared. Poised tensely, the troops waited as night fell. At 9 p.m., the telephone rang. The voice on the other end warned that the rebels were on their way. Minutes later, a sentry fell, shot through the neck by sniper fire. The sounds of shouting and gunfire echoed through the imperial park. They grew closer and closer. During those anxious hours, Anastasia began to feel tired and her muscles ached. It was the first sign of oncoming measles. Hoping her symptoms would go away, she went upstairs and lay down, but nerves and the occasional gunshot made it impossible to sleep. Once, when the shooting sounded especially close, she got up and looked out her window. A huge field gun had been dragged into the courtyard, and soldiers were dancing around it, stamping their feet and trying to stay warm. "How astonished Papa will be," the girl whispered to Lily Dane. Night dragged on, but the attack never materialized. Instead, the mob turned back after hearing rumors that a huge force of troops armed with machine guns protected the imperial family. It was still dark the next morning when a feverish Anastasia dragged herself out of bed. Nicholas had cabled he'd be home by 6 a.m., and measles or not, she wanted to be waiting when he arrived. But he did not come. "The train is late," Alexandra explained. "Perhaps the blizzard detains him." But her voice shook, and worry lined her face. "The train is never late," Anastasia exclaimed, suddenly panicked. "Oh, if only Papa would come quickly." It wasn't until mid-morning that they learned Nicholas's train had been stopped en route. Alexandra quickly sent a cable from the palace telegraph office to the imperial train. She received no reply. Anxiously, she sent another message, and still another. Each one came back marked, address of person mentioned unknown. Sick and frightened, Anastasia broke down. "I'm beginning to be ill," she sobbed to Lily Den. "What shall I do if I get ill? I can't be useful to Mamma. Oh, Lily, say I'm not going to be ill. And then, please don't keep me in bed. Please don't, please." Smoothing the girl's hair and murmuring reassuring words, Lily persuaded her to lie down. Early the next morning, March 15th, the battalion guarding the palace deserted, and Alexandra's self-control finally broke. "My sailors," she sobbed, "my own sailors. I can't believe it." It was not just the troops who deserted. Many of the palace's hundreds of maids, chauffeurs, cooks, and footmen vanished from the marble hallways. That same day, the electricity and water were cut off, as well as its telegraph and telephone. The remaining servants were forced to break ice on the pond for water, and without electricity, the little elevator between the Empress's drawing room and the children's rooms above no longer worked. Exhausted and in pain, Alexandra had no choice but to climb the stairs. Gasping for breath, she dragged herself up the dark staircase. "I must not give way," she confided to Lily Den. "I keep on saying, I must not. It helps me." "Where is the Tsar?" That same morning, Nicholas's train chugged into the town of Pskov. For days, his route home had been slowed or detoured as revolutionaries seized control of the tracks. Now, learning from advisers that the palace guard had deserted, he finally grasped the situation. There was, he concluded, no other choice. He would have to give in and appoint a government acceptable to the people. He immediately telegraphed Radzienko with his offer. Minutes later, Radzienko answered, "His Majesty is apparently unable to realize what is happening in the capital. A terrible revolution has broken out. The measures you propose are too late. The time for them is gone. There is no return." Now telegrams began to pour in from Nicholas's generals, those men of the nobility whose opinions he valued most. They all urged a bleak course of action. To save the army, the war campaign, the country, and perhaps, most important, the Romanov dynasty, the Tsar needed to resign his throne. They believed his abdication in favor of a different ruler would be enough to appease the people. Nicholas chain-smoked as he read these messages. Then he stood and looked out the train window. There was a gloomy silence. "I have decided that I will give up the throne in favor of my son, Alexei," he finally said. Then turning to face the 3 attendant generals with him, he crossed himself and went to his bedroom. Why did he give it all up so easily? Some historians have speculated that his abdication was an extraordinary act of patriotism, that he cared more about winning the war than keeping his throne. Others have suggested he was simply tired and longed to be left in peace. Whatever his reasons, that night in his diary he wrote, "For the sake of Russia and to keep the armies in the field, I decided to take this step. I left with a heavy heart. All around me I see treason, cowardice, and deceit." But just hours later, Nicholas reconsidered his decision. How could he possibly leave his sick 12-year-old son in charge of the country? He could not. With heavy heart, Nicholas sat down at the desk and wrote his abdication manifesto. In it, he gave up the throne in favor of his brother, Grand Duke Michael. His attendant generals rushed to the train's telegraph room to forward the news to Petrograd. In Petrograd. Outside the Tsaride Palace, now headquarters of the newly established provisional government, a crush of people jammed the gardens and courtyard, waiting for news of the Tsar. An official stepped triumphantly onto the balcony, explaining what had happened. He ended his speech with, "Long live the Emperor Michael!" The mob erupted with anger. They had not overthrown Nicholas simply to replace him with his brother. The people no longer wanted or needed a Tsar. What they wanted was a republic, the type of government where the people held the power, and their will was expressed through their elected representatives. Raising their fists in the air, they shouted, "Down with the dynasty, and long live the republic!" Surging into the streets, the people attacked any and all Tsarist symbols, toppling statues and burning double-headed eagles. In the Winter Palace, Nicholas's official portrait was slashed with bayonets. A huge demonstration of soldiers marched to demand an end to the Romanov dynasty. Their angry expressions and loaded rifles quickly convinced the new government that keeping the monarchy, as Britain had, was impossible. If a new Tsar was forced on the people, there would surely be further violence, perhaps even a civil war. Convinced all the Romanovs had to go, Rodzianko, along with Alexander Kerensky, set out to persuade Grand Duke Michael to also abdicate. Michael listened closely to their arguments. Then he turned to Kerensky. Could the new government guarantee his safety if he took the throne? No, answered Rodzianko. Wanting time to think, Michael stepped out of the room, but only 5 minutes later he returned. Tears in his eyes, he said simply, "I've decided to decline the throne." Rodzianko pulled out a prepared document, and Michael signed it. With that, 304 years of Romanov rule came to an end. Scenes of rejoicing. The end of Romanov rule was greeted by joyous demonstrations in Petrograd. Crowds hung red flags from roofs, balconies, windows, and statues. There was singing, parades, and rousing speeches. Cannons boomed, bells pealed. The revolution had taken place entirely in Petrograd, unknown to the rest of the country, but as news spread to Moscow and other cities and towns in the last days of March, reaction was much the same. The entire city became like a wild street carnival that one could not wait to get outside to see, recalled one citizen. The soldiers at the front were wild with joy, too. When the news arrived, a mighty huzzah rose from the trenches like a song. Flinging their caps into the air, they pounded each other on the back. Some even fired a few precious rounds of ammunition into the air. Overnight, red ribbons appeared on almost everything: rifle butts, horse saddles, cannons. Most hoped that revolution also meant the end of the war. As a fighting force, the Russian army had completely collapsed. It hadn't launched an offensive since June 1916, and its war aims had been reduced to protecting its borders. With news of the revolution, tens of thousands of peasant soldiers, tired of sitting around with empty bellies, simply walked away from war. Others, believing the revolution put them on an equal footing with their officers, formed committees to decide whether or not to obey a command. Some refused to salute, others insisted on choosing their own officers. Explained one soldier to his fellow troops. "Haven't you understood? Don't you know what a revolution is? It's when the people take all the power. And what's the people without us? The soldier with our guns? Bah, it's obvious. It means that the power belongs to us." The news, as it slowly spread across the vast and remote countryside, frightened some of the villagers. The church was full of crying peasants, one citizen recalled. "What will become of us?" others wailed. "They have taken the Tsar away from us." But as the weeks passed and their lives went on as usual, many peasants celebrated. "Our village burst into life," recalled one. "Everyone felt enormous relief, as if a heavy rock had suddenly been lifted from our shoulders," remembered another. "People kissed each other from joy and said that life from now on would be good." They praised God for the divine gift of the people's victory. Like that, the reign of the Romanovs vanished. Beyond the palace gates, "Ye tyrants quake, your day is over." In his autobiography, Story of a Life, Konstantin Postovsky vividly recalls the moment his little town of Yefremov, located 640 miles south of Petrograd, received word of the revolution weeks after it happened. It was 1 o'clock in the night, a time when Yefremov was usually fast asleep. Suddenly, at this odd hour, there sounded a short, booming peal of the cathedral bell. Then another, and a third. The pealing grew faster, its noise spread over the town, and soon the bells of all the outlying churches started to ring. Lights were lit in all the houses, the streets filled with people. The doors of many houses stood open. Strangers, weeping openly, embraced each other. The solemn, exultant whistling of locomotives could be heard from the direction of the station. Somewhere, far down one street, there began, first quietly, then steadily louder, singing, "Ye tyrants quake, your day is over, detested now by friend and foe." The singing brass sounds of a band joined the human voices in the chorus. Back at the palace, on the evening of March 16th, one day after Nicholas's abdication, his uncle, Grand Duke Paul, arrived at the Alexander Palace. He went straight to Alexandra with the news. "It's all lies," she cried when he finished. "The newspapers invented it. I believed in God and the army." "God and the army are on the side of the revolution now," replied the Grand Duke. Minutes later, recalled Lily Den, the study door opened and the Empress appeared. Her face was distorted with agony, her eyes were full of tears. Stumbling forward, Alexandra grabbed the edge of a nearby table to steady herself. Abdique, she croaked, using the French word for abdicated. And then, in a whispered sob, she added, "The poor dear, all alone down there. What has he gone through? Oh my, what has he gone through? And I was not there to console him."